Well, frankly, if I were to put it into context of the 19th century, I don't think there's really any real difference in the 19th century. Because, I mean, and my best proof of that is not what socialists themselves may or may not have said. It's that you even get those whom we think of as the Haymarket martyrs in Chicago in the 1880s, the anarchists as they were known. They called themselves social democrats. I don't believe they called themselves anarchists. There was this general idea that social democracy really was the sort of broad umbrella for socialism. We offer a course, which we all team teach in my program, titled Intro to Democracy and Justice Studies. And the first lecture in the semester is the one that I give, which is sort of to put into their minds a kind of model of democracy. And the lectures that follow, which include everything from the Declaration of Independence to a lecture on Karl Marx, these are colleagues of mine. I do Thomas Paine, Franklin Roosevelt. We try to create this broad sort of idea of democracy, is rooted in this argument of T.H. Marshall, who said that, when we think about democracy and we think about rights, and especially he was writing in the context of post-war Britain, post-war Europe, he was trying to sort of fit what we would think of as social democracy into this broader sort of historical map or historical agenda or historical, I don't want to call it a chronology, but development. So he refers, first of all, to civil or civic rights. And this refers to a very essential thing in terms of equality. And that has to do with equality under the law, that there's no privileged group in society that stands outside or above the law, keeping in mind especially what had happened in Britain and Europe and elsewhere in the world, where you actually had a noble class, an aristocratic class, a lordly class, and they were not subject to the same laws as ordinary working people, whether we're talking about artisans or peasants or anyone else. And in the 18th century and into the 19th century, much of the struggle for equality began with this struggle for civil or civic equality, equal under the law. No one is exempt from that. And that remains a really important concept when we think about it, even in terms of Trump's America. I mean, Trump has done everything he could since the day he arrived in office to elevate himself and to some extent his family and cronies to be above the law by playing this game of I can pardon anybody, I can even pardon myself. But equality before the law is essential. Equality under the law before the law is also essential in the sense that it means that we all have, and I know this isn't going to strike people on the left as a great breakthrough, but historically it was, we all have an equal right to own property, which means to own our own home, essentially, as opposed to being subject to living on a lord's estate where if you live in any kind of hovel on that estate, that hovel quite often belonged to the estate owners or to the landlord's feudal family. It also referred to the idea of the possibility of equal under the law, meaning that whatever the religious commitment, that all were equal under the law in that respect. But even more fundamentally, it meant that you had the right to get up and leave wherever you were, because historically in the Middle Ages and early modern years, in much of Europe, you didn't have the right to get up and leave. You were bound to the estate or bound to the lord. But so the first sort of struggle for equal rights, or what will eventually we might think of as democratic rights and equality, is this notion of this idea of equal before, equal under the law, that no one stands above or outside the law.
But laws aren't just a matter of policemen and jails, Kent. We need them only as people disrespect the law. The amazing thing is the small amount of enforcement that is necessary. That's the real proof of the rightness of law. That's why I decided to become a lawyer, to help people understand the law, to help promote respect for law. Kent, would you like to help?
Me?
Yes.
Can I?
Of course you can.
What social democrats are saying that humans have needs, and those needs need to be socialized, need to be answered by socializing what is often left to the market. Okay, so this means, for example, that everything from education to healthcare must be socialized. For that matter, the U.S. Post Office. Okay, don't leave it in the don't leave communications in the hands of private interests. Or how about water supply? How about all the utilities? These become essential to human development. And the idea is to make them municipal or state-owned. That's also part of this idea of social democracy. But there's another crucial variable, which we often forget when we talk about this. Whether you were Marx or you were some less sort of visionary social democrat, the fact is that the belief, it was imperative that working people be organized, okay? That they be organized. And not organized only for the idea of the struggle, but also organized because in organizing, the organizations become schools of democracy, labor unions. And in some fashion, you would almost imagine that those are sort of preparation for the democratization of the economy more broadly. We've left out this idea of socialism versus communism, and that classic distinction was socialism was like a period of transition and actually a period of class education, self-education in how one can become a citizen on a grander scale than merely choosing a candidate at voting. How do we manage things in a democratic fashion? Well, we need to educate ourselves to be able to do that kind of stuff. But if we go to social democracy, and I'm not even arguing for the long haul of what might come, my argument is that social democracy clearly empowers working people, A, to secure their rights, and B, to defend their rights. And a good example of what I mean by that is the last 45 years, when they went after the social rights and the economic rights that had developed in the 20th century, corporate bosses went after labor unions, smashed the unions, and how will working people ever be able to defend the rights that they have secured, or even the goddamn pensions that they've secured, you might say. And the Democratic Party, over the long haul, has suffered as a consequence. I mean, who are the ground troops of the Democratic Party? Who goes door to door knocking on behalf of the Democratic Party? Over and over again, been teachers union members, nursing union members, municipal employee union members. And when you smash these unions, you smash the capacity to mobilize people to not only to vote, but to bring out the vote. I'm telling you, they've been brilliant these last 45 years in the class war from above. And that's part of the social democratic struggle.
Such as auto and steel, the employers are tough and unreasonable. As Phil Murray says, there is a conspiracy by big business against American democracy. To understand this conspiracy, we must remember what happened after World War I in 1919. At that time, to meet the high cost of living, labor unions asked for wage increases. The answer was a lesson.
No, we don't. But we don't, and here's why. So Marx talked, if we use the term socialization to refer to the degree to which capitalism socializes the means of production, it's still an ademocratic, anti-democratic organization of the social relations of production. And yet, by bringing workers together, okay, we know how that happened. What it did is it provided the grounds for solidarity, a very key term. And it's in that solidarity and the creation of workers' organizations that workers not only empower themselves, they also educate themselves to the very process, possibly, of democratizing industry, which is why in the 20th century, liberals and social democrats, not liberals in the 18th century market sense, but liberals in the sense of progressives, liberals, and social democrats, they actually began to use the term industrial democracy. And industrial democracy envisioned first, as a sort of initial stage, the very idea of workers having a voice in the workplace. That is, to collectively bargain for wages and benefits, okay? That's for a start. But it's also the case that unions don't stand on their own. Unions themselves became part of federation. They became a part of a broader labor union movement, and they became part of federations. And those federations literally came to represent the interests of working people, demanding certain things both from government and from employers. And industrial democracy was part of that. And employers battled over just the fundamental question of collective bargaining. They were willing to kill to prevent collective bargaining. They were willing to suppress, they were going to beat heads, shoot people if they had to. There was no way they were going to give up their absolute authority to control the workplace. And the only way in which unionization and the beginnings of industrial democracy could take place is that workers organized. Okay? And by 1955, I'm giving a massive jump in history here. 1 out of every 3 workers was in a labor union. And it was also a period in which the distance or the inequality between owners and workers was actually reducing. From 1938 to 1973, inequality in the United States was decreasing. Why? Because workers were organized. They not only then could confront the bosses en masse, they could strike. Okay, they could walk out. Okay, so and that's fundamental. Now, there were times in the 30s and in the 40s and even beyond in which labor unions themselves began to speak of ways of expanding industrial democracy, to give workers themselves an even greater say in the management of enterprises. There were the examples over in Europe, in Germany, where unions actually elect members to the boards of directors. In Sweden, was it called the Meissner Plan, where profits of the corporation actually went into the buying of shares of the corporation that were handed over into a trust to be held by workers, by the labor unions. I mean, there are ways that one could imagine or envision moving from what we think of as the anti or undemocratic socializing of the relations of production to an ever more democratic kind of socialization. But here's the other thing. Not everyone's going to be in a labor union, right? And we really have to start imagining that even in a social democratic, or if you prefer, socialist kind of political economy, there are going to be diverse means of owning, right? There might well be community ownership. There might well be worker-owned and managed industries. There might be state-owned and managed enterprises. I mean, we have to be creative about that. But again, my view right now is that those kinds of questions come out of the development of social democracy. And right now, for 45 years, social democracy has been under siege. Capital has been, ever since the mid-70s, late 70s, especially in the 80s, has literally pushed back and all but buried social democracy. We talked a little bit a while ago about voting rights being under siege, but so too for the last 30 years, we've seen workers lose their pensions. We've seen what do they call it? Social Security under siege, Medicare under siege constantly. The push for national health care in this country was stymied and turned into, a halfway measure called Obamacare. I mean, the struggle for social democracy is a very serious one. We win these battles, and then we can perhaps talk about other kinds of advances too.
Under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Bill is going to do some fixing of his own. He smells November coming. He even smells the date. November 5th.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.